Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Zen and Zazen on Mondays. Today, Labor Day. Um, it's not a holiday in Japan, but in the middle of the Golden Week. And I don't see so many participants from China. Is it because of the Labor Week? I see. People don't feel like sitting. Um, but thank you for all the rest of you, everybody who joined. And as always, let's sit first for half an hour. And after that, I will talk about the Fukan Zazengi, Dogen's manual for Zazen. And of course, as always, there will be opportunity for you to share your thoughts or ask questions. Thank you for joining. Today I want to continue to talk about Dogen Zenji's Fukan Zazengi. I'd like to share my screen. Today on the left side I got the Japanese version, which is a little bit different from the Chinese original. Maybe you can see that there's these kind of roundish, in Japanese called hiragana. So when you recite it in the Japanese way, you need these hiragana so that you know how to pronounce these words in Japanese. On the right side you have the English version that you can find on the Eintaiji homepage. We finished the introductory part, where Dogen Zenji first speaks of that, well, basically we're already in the middle of enlightenment. There's nothing that we need to seek for. But then the whole thing takes a little spin, because then the question is, of course, if we're already inside enlightenment, why should we practice? That's exactly the question that Dogen Zenji had when he was already a teenager. First, I would like to read the first part of the text in Japanese. Fukanza zengi tazunuru ni sore do moto enzu ika deka shusho o karan. Shujo jizai nanzo kufu o tsuiyasan. Iwan ya zentai harukani jinnai o izu. Tareka hoshiki no shudan o shinzen. That's the part that in English would be: the way is originally perfect and all-pervading. What need is therefore practice and realization. The Dharma vehicle is rolling freely. Why should we exhaust our efforts? There's no speck of dust in the whole universe. How could we ever try to brush it clean? Everything is manifest at this very place. Where are we supposed to direct the feet of our practice? And a couple of weeks ago I explained that by a poem by the famous American poet E. Cummings. Seeker of truth, follow no path. All paths lead there. Truth is here. So whatever path you take, it will only take you away from where you want to go, which is right here, right now. There's no need to practice. There's no need to look for truth. And then, for my feeling, the text takes an interesting spin. Quoting from the Shinjin Me, Dogen Zenji says, "Shikare domo gori mo sa areba tenshi haruka ni hedatari, ijun wazuka ni okoreba funzen toshite shin o shisu." Which in English would be: now if you make the slightest discrimination, you will create a gap like that between heaven and earth. If you follow one thing while you resist the other, your mind will be shattered and lost. So on the surface, here again, these two phrases seem to repeat what has already been said. Basically, stop making distinctions. Let go of your dualistic mind, and you will find it already here. But what is meant with dualism here? I think for Dogen Zenji, Dogen Zenji sees clearly when we say enlightenment is non-dualistic. Delusion is dualistic. So we only have to let go of our dualistic mind to find enlightenment. Dogen Zenji sees clearly that that distinction is also dualistic. The distinction that is important for Dogen and that we need to overcome is the distinction between theoretical understanding that we are already enlightenment and the practice of enlightenment. It's not enough to understand that we are already Buddhas as we are. We have to live as Buddhas. And if we don't understand that, or we don't practice it, then our understanding of Buddhahood only becomes an excuse for us to not practice it. And we justify ourselves by saying, well, practice is dualistic. Practice is aimed as a goal, but we're already here, so why should we practice? But isn't that dualistic thinking also, and it only helps our laziness to excuse ourselves from practice. Another distinction that's important here in the Fukan Zazengi, and that's the reason why I started reading this text a couple of weeks in the first place. You might remember I did this thought experiment. Suppose you could receive some organs from another person, or you could donate from another person. How would you think about it? And then thought experiments, well, how about the brain? And I did that thought experiment to show that probably a lot of us, we identify with our brain because that's where our consciousness is. And our identification with the body is probably not as strong. Of course, this body is also important for us. But if I had to choose between this body and somebody else's consciousness, or my consciousness and somebody else's body, maybe I would choose keeping my consciousness and trading my body for somebody else's, because I am my consciousness. But for Dogen, that's also a dualistic distinction that we need to overcome. The distinction between mind and body. They belong together. They belong together. And probably that's the reason why later in the text we don't get that far today. Later in the text, oh sorry, I should have picked up the microphone. Later in the text, Dogen Zenji talks a lot about how to actually adjust the posture. And then he says surprisingly few things about how you can adjust the mind. And I think the reason for that is also because for Dogen Zenji, these are not two topics. If you adjust the body, then already you're adjusting your mind. You don't have to adjust the body first and later you do something with the mind. But adjusting the body is adjusting the mind. Schwanzan, how do we do it today? You want to translate or?
I think only my parents. Maybe I can translate later.
Okay, okay. So then I continue with my talk, and maybe you can translate for your parents later. 2 weeks ago, we did the following couple of sentences. たとえ絵に誇り、語に豊かにして別地の秩を得、道を得、真を諦めて焦点の識を越し、日東の変量に商用すといえども、ほとんど出身の活路をき消す。I talked about that 2 weeks ago. In English, that would have been suppose you are confident in your understanding and rich in enlightenment. So you already got it. Suppose you already got it. You're quite sure that you are Buddha. Gaining the wisdom that knows at a glance. Attaining the way and clarifying the mind. Arousing an aspiration to reach for the heavens. Now your head is stuck in the entranceway while your body has no clue how to get out. So if you understand that you're already enlightened, that intellectual understanding just makes you stuck. You're still stuck there. Your body isn't liberated. Are you really liberated? And now Dogen Zenji explains, well, why we have to do Zazen. But his explanation is not a theoretical explanation, but it's more that he points to the historic example of the Buddha himself and Shakyamuni. The next two sentences are Iwan ya kano gyo no shochi taru tanza rokunen no shoseki mitsubeshi shori no shin-in o tsutauru menpeki kusai no shomyo nao kikoyu. In English, that's although Shakyamuni was wise at birth. I don't know, if for most of you it's probably not so interesting, but I might want to show you also the... No, that's not what I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you the Chinese. That's the Chinese text. So I marked the part that we're talking about today. He's talking about the Buddha, but he doesn't mention the Buddha's name. Rather, he's referring to the place where he practiced and preached. In Japanese, it's called Gion. I think that the Indian name was Jetavana. Is there something like that? A garden where he preached. And he was wise from birth. Iwan ya gion no shochi taru. Buddha was wise from birth. Actually, they say that right after birth he pointed to the heavens and he pointed to the earth and said, right from the highest heaven down to earth, there's no one more important than myself, which sounded very full of himself. But he realized that he was living the existence that cannot be compared to anything else. So according to that, Shakyamuni wouldn't have needed to practice. He was a Buddha from birth, which might not be historically correct. So according to the teaching of the Buddha, of Buddhism, Buddha was not enlightened at birth. Actually, it was his last lifetime, but he needed to practice to get to enlightenment. Either way, Dogen Zenji here claims for the sake of his argument that Shakyamuni was wise at birth, but still, he practiced for 6 years upright sitting. Can't you see the traces of the 6 years of upright sitting? Here he is referring to the 6 years that led up to the enlightenment, 6 years of ascetic practice, which is a little bit strange because, at least from the point of view of Dogen, what is more important is that Shakyamuni, after he attained enlightenment at the age of 35 or so under the Bodhi tree, he didn't stop to sit. Actually, the sutras tell us that he practiced daily after that. There's even this interesting story that at one time he did a solitary retreat for 2 weeks by himself after he was enlightened. He was already enlightened. He had lots of students, but at one time he told his student Ananda, I'm going to go on a solitary retreat for 2 weeks. Please don't call on me. I want to be completely alone. During those 2 weeks, 500 of his students took their life. And when Shakyamuni got back to the Sangha, he was surprised, why are so few people here? And Ananda told him only then, well, actually, after you left, 500 of your students decided that if life is suffering anyway, why do we have to live? And they killed themselves. And according to the sutras, then Shakyamuni said, well, actually, you shouldn't cause suffering even to your own body. So please don't take your life. So it might have been, from my point of view, it might have made even more sense if Dogen Zenji would have said, hey, look at the Buddha, even after enlightenment, for the following 45 years of his life, he continued to practice. He continued to practice even after enlightenment. And then the second example is Bodhidharma. Actually, well, you see two pictures of Bodhidharma behind me, the famous monk who brought Zen from India to China. And he, of course, already had Dharma transmission from his Indian teacher. Prajnatara is the Indian name, or Hanyatala. Hanyatala is the name in Japanese. He was a transmitted teacher. And he met with the Chinese emperor. They had a dialogue. I think I talked about that in the past. Finally, the Chinese emperor asked him, who are you in the first place? Who are you to tell me that I didn't get any virtues for promoting Buddhism in China? And Bodhidharma said, I don't know. And then he went to the mountains and sit 9 years facing a wall. And he didn't do that to gain enlightenment. Bodhidharma was enlightened. Still, can't you hear the echo of the 9 years he sat facing a wall? Dogen Zenji writes here, Bodhidharma transmitted the mind seal from India. And still, after arriving in China, in the cave at Shaolin, he sat for 9 years. So if that's the case, if even the ancient sages were like this, how can we today dispense with wholehearted practice? So don't use your understanding that you are already enlightened, that there's nothing to gain, to excuse yourself from practice. If that's an excuse for yourself, why would the Buddha have said? Why would Bodhidharma have said in Zazen? Okay, so much from my side. We still have time, so if you have questions, please feel free to ask. Anything you would like to share? Bernal, please. And Julian is also raising his hand. Maybe Bernal first, then Julian.
I prefer Julian. I haven't here. I prefer to.
You prefer Julian. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Julian, you prefer Bernal, or are you okay with starting?
I better say something useful then, hadn't I? I just wanted to, that passage so reminds me of my work as a bodywork therapist, you know, where people come to me and they've got a good cognitive understanding maybe of what's causing them distress, but they haven't really valued what their body is doing. And, you know, I find that the mind is so spread out in the body, like emotion in the shoulder or in the knees or in the lower back. And I think really Dogen's just saying here, isn't he? You know, these guys had to sit. We have to really trust that it's happening in the body as much as it's happening there, and it is just so tangible and real when it comes into my therapy room. I just thought it was worth mentioning that again. Yes.
I mean, the example from the Genjo Koan that Chris had been mentioning a couple of times, even if the air is everywhere, you have to fan it so you get wind. The intellectual understanding that, well, the air is already there, why do I have to fan it? That won't cool you in the summer.
It struck me the other day, it's that, like that example of the cook who doesn't actually cook, or say Lionel Messi. Lionel Messi knows he's a great footballer. He knows how to put spin on the ball, but there's no point if he doesn't actually go out and use his body and do it, you know. So thank you for giving me first slot.
Yeah, so the answer to that question, if we're already Buddhas, why would we practice? Dogen's answer would be, well, exactly because you practice being a Buddha, you are a Buddha, you can be called a Buddha. Exactly because you're cooking, you are a cook. Bernal, please.
Yes, thank you. I thought about what you said of the mind that can be just settled or quiet by just adjusting the body, and that's something that I've understood relatively like recently, paid more attention on that because I also get confused sometimes of the instructions on the mind of doing something, that we shouldn't get caught up by thoughts. But isn't that an instruction of doing something with the mind? And I sometimes think that maybe it's just a reminder that we don't have to do like an effort to get caught up by the thoughts. It's just like, just let it settle by itself. I don't know
Yes.
if I get myself clear.
Yes, yes. Yeah. I said when you're adjusting the body, you are already adjusting the mind. But probably an experience that all of us make is, even though we sit still and motionless, there's still something up in our mind. Just because the body sits still doesn't mean that the mind is quiet. There are thoughts coming up, and some of these thoughts are disturbing. Or we read in a book we're not supposed to think, so we think that we have to clear up our mind and remove those thoughts. But how can you do that? Especially once you realize that the mind that's thinking, I'm not supposed to think, is already thinking. I'm not supposed to think is also a thought. So how do you let go of these thoughts? And one thing is you pay attention to your body. You pay attention to the physical experience of sitting, rather than bother yourself about, there's again a thought. What do I do next? How can I let it go? I need to let it go. Rather than that, when you pay attention to the physical act of just sitting, makes it much easier. There's still thoughts like clouds floating through the sky, but you're much less disturbed or bothered by these clouds in the sky. Ushi, please.
Hi, Muhu.
Hi.
I just have a question, because you just mentioned this from the Buddha's life story, that he went to retreat and 500 is quite a lot, yeah? 500 students committed suicide because, if this would happen nowadays, this would be a huge, yeah? But the thing is, I've never heard this story before. So where is this recorded? Also, where are there some reliable references to this story? I've never heard this before.
I could look it up. It's somewhere in the Pali Canon, in the oldest sutras. But I mean, a lot of these sutras, they, how do you say, over-exaggerate? They exaggerate this stuff. So it's not just because it's in the sutra, doesn't mean that it actually happened that way.
Hopefully.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. Or maybe that they just invented the story to kind of, how do you say, explain
to
why it's
frighten
not...
the students, in fact. Yeah, this was what I think. But no, yeah.
Yeah. I quote it also in my German book, so I can look it up until next week or so. You can also find it. If you look on the internet, Buddhism, mass suicide, probably it comes up. Because the topic of suicide is quite controversial in Buddhism. And I found it on the internet originally when I Googled suicide in Buddhism. You can find it maybe even on Wikipedia also.
No, yeah, okay, I will look up, but if I find more of that, I will inform you. Then
okay.
I'm really worried.
Yeah, well, there's quite some interesting stuff there. Yeah.
Thank you, Mo.
Anything else that you would like to share or ask? Any questions you have? If not, it's 3 to 9. So originally I think the class was planned from 8 to 8:50 or so. So we don't have to... but Julian is raising his hand. So please,
sorry.
please.
Just a practical question. That
Yeah.
Japanese text you put up of the Fukan Zazengi, what's the website for that with the Japanese text?
Okay, I'll put it in the chat
Thanks.
function. It's called soto-kinky.net, and I'll put it in the chat.
Just to help my ongoing struggle with intermediate Japanese. Thank you.
I'm sure there's different versions also, but that's the
Mm.
one that you find in the chat function. That's what I read today. Okay, thank you for joining even on Labor Day. And next week is probably the last day of the Golden Week in Japan. Schwanson, you're okay even during the holiday season?
Yes, yes.
I would be. How do you say? I hope I didn't destroy your holidays. Yeah, thank you for hosting us even during Golden Week. And if you have time, next Sunday, Monday 8th, we meet again. Schwansan will be back from Antaiji. And as she said, while she's in Antaiji, there's also the chance to connect with her yoga classes on Zoom. Early in the morning Japanese time and then evening again. So in Europe it might be the other way around. The morning classes are probably in the evening and the evening classes might be around noon or before noon. Okay, thank you. Was nice to see you. Hope you have a nice week and looking forward to see you again. Thank you.